This video is about the autistic experience and the lack of expressing it, because it is the lost instinct of sensing. There are no words for empathic experience and feeling your environment.
I get nervous about talking sometimes from an autistic perspective, because when autistic people share our perspective, we do it in a way that's aligned with neuronormative communication. So right now, what I mean by that in this moment is that I'm using verbal language to try and express a physical and energetic experience I have in life as an autistic person. I think it's so important for people to understand that when autistic people share our experience, see, I'm even trying to find language right now in this moment to express my experience. And it's not always doable. There aren't words. There aren't always words that match my experience or something I want to express, because verbal communication is limited for autistic people, because we experience the world from a whole being perspective. We are not limited to our five senses. You know, our processing goes beyond that. We hear things that other people don't hear. Sometimes we see things that other people don't see. We sense energy, like I've been talking about. So having a language to express a lot of our experiences is really difficult. So when you read a textbook written by a non-autistic expert, and that's typically where the information about autism comes from, it's going to be very superficial information. It's based on observation. It's always based on a person observing behavior. Now, behavior is a byproduct of an internalized experience of being. I use my hands a lot when I talk. And so the behavior is just a communication. It's just clues. But you can never really know about the depth and intensity of somebody's real experience, their whole being experience, based on verbal communication. There are a lot of challenges that autistic children, autistic adults have, that have words put to them. I would prefer to call it energy disconnection. Now, I talk a lot about energy, and even the concept of energy can be difficult for people to understand. But myself and many other autistic people, we sense things about people without even needing to speak to them. So we're very sensitive to atmosphere or a vibe or presence that people bring, or the way a room might feel. And for me, this is why I'm very sensitive to being in crowds, because energy is like a constant stream, an invisible stream of information about a person, and that fluctuates based on how they're doing. So if a person is anxious, I can feel into their anxious energy, and it doesn't matter what they say or what they do. If they show up and say, yeah, I'm fine, I'm really well, thanks, I know if they're not. And a lot of people call this being empathic or a highly sensitive person, but most autistic people are very empathic and highly sensitive. that autistic people have often hypersensitive sensory processing differences. So being able to plug into an energy of safety and security and connection through our senses is what will help us to transition from that energy, to unplug from it and move on to the classroom or wherever else we're going. It's not as simple and as black and white as picking up things that remind them of home and putting it there for them to look at. It is a complete energetic sensory experience for us. And I know sometimes people hear me talk about energy and they think, oh, what? What does she mean by energy? Energy is the feeling that somebody brings with them. So an example of this is somebody might come into our space that we've never met before, and we can tell that they are a very angry person. We don't need to have a conversation with them. We don't need to go near them. We can just tell in an instant that they're an angry person and we don't feel safe with them. Autistic people have this on a much larger scale. It's the first thing we tap into. This is why I often say verbal language is not our native tongue. Energy is. Feeling into people, places and things is our first language. And this is why we get confused in social situations, because reading faces and getting things wrong in social situations, sometimes that comes down to actually the fact that we know how someone's really going and they're not being honest about it. So we might say to somebody, oh, are you okay? You seem a little bit down today. And they'll say, no, I'm fine. And then we think we've got it wrong, but actually we haven't. We've got it right. But the social norm would be to accept what they're saying and to move forward. But when we're autistic, we know what the truth is. And so then we have this moment that we're stuck in going, oh, okay. Is this about me? Do they just not want to tell me the truth? And more often than not, we turn on ourselves and think there's something wrong with us. It doesn't matter what the person says. Yes, I'm fine. We know what the truth is, and energy does not lie. Our intuition, and that is the way that we read other people's energies, is our highest truth. Energy is in everything. Energy belongs to inanimate objects. So that's why I say, if I take this coin and I hold this coin and then I put it back down and it's separate from my energy, it still carries my energy. And many autistic people can pick up items and feel different strains of energy from different people. That's why, again, it's hard for me to be in crowds. It's hard for many of us to be in a classroom because there are so many different energies that it feels unstable and chaotic. And we're trying to balance those energies because it's information, it's data that autistic people process. So we're not just processing information from those five senses, we're processing it in other ways as well. And I know this sounds, a lot of people might hear this and go, oh, that sounds like a load of crap, all supernatural. And I don't mean it to be that way. Again, it's just that I don't have an adequate language for it. So it might sound airy-fairy, but that's because I don't have a language for it.
What Christy Forbes is saying, it's such a confirmation of my own experience. But you just have no words to express your experience because there are no words for this. And how are you supposed to describe something somebody else has no concept of, because he or she is not experiencing that. So of course they will not believe you. They will say, "Oh, that's impossible. Ah, you are imagining things." Right? And that's how you get shut down as a kid. You stop talking about it. And you think, it's you. You are wrong. And, well, I think alexithymia actually is a result of that. You are being told so many times that what you are experiencing isn't true. Well, you get so confused. Then you think what you are experiencing isn't true. But you are still experiencing it, so what does it mean? See? That's a whole different kind of brainwashing. You are surrounded by people who have no concept of your experience. And then they invalidate you, they dismiss it, they devalue your experience. I'm so glad when I first heard about this kind of experience by none other than Donna Williams. She describes it in her, I think it's the 4th or 5th book, Autism and Sensing, The Unlost Instinct by Donna Williams. Can someone appear unaware, even unable to retain, reason or reflect, yet actually have capabilities even they didn't know they had? This book demonstrates how and why this is sometimes possible and will change the way you think about hidden potential and how to help them release it. Published in 1998, this highly controversial and challenging book was the first internationally published textbook by a person diagnosed with autism on the importance of understanding apperception and the system of sensing in autistic individuals. The realm of sensing is the place we have all come from. That world before mind was thought of as me. Before body became mine. That time when we knew, because we felt the nature of things, the feel of them, when we sensed. This was before we had learned to interpret and see the world not as it was, but through our concepts and ideas of what it was. Autism is seen as a disability in a world where interpretation is highly valued, where the realm of mind, of imposed meaning, of words become the place of trust, of proof, a world in which the system of sensing becomes progressively redundant, devalued, discredited, even discouraged. This book is a journey into a unique way of experiencing the world, suggesting how this unlost instinct has much to teach us about the assumption of so-called normality. My world equals one's own world. This is our first world, before all of its later cladding and contortions. It is at first a place of sensing, beingness, the pre-conscious mind and unknown knowing. It is the place where we understand self in others and others in self through the skill of mergence. The external world equals the physical world, known through our sensory experiences as processed through our bodies, brains, and experienced as sensations, thoughts, emotions, connections. This is a directly hands-on world, where sensing and beingness may be relatively strongly intact. The interpretive world, the world of applied meaning to incoming experiences that progressively builds mental structures and frameworks that ultimately filter our direct sensed experiences of the physical world and develops conscious mind as the primary guide. Ego world, ego contortion that further clads, alters, and filters the logical meaning we get from experiences of the physical world and further buries our original capacity for sensing and beingness. This can be indoctrination, culture, economics, identifications, rewards, honed addictions, and competition for social, economic, cultural currency. There are later books that came out. One is by Olga Bogdashina, where she writes and compares this experiencing with altered state and quotes Aldous Huxley's experience, which I find very interesting. And then, of course, there is Ian McGilchrist with his book The Master and His Emissary, where he compares the two perspectives of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And then you have Jill Bolte's experience, where she describes her left hemisphere stroke, how she lost language and the sense of I and completely got lost in feeling everything, and there was no sense of I and no boundary.
This is a talk about the system of sensing. I originally wrote about the system of sensing in a book called Autism and Sensing the Unlost Instinct, which was published in 1995. The reason why it was packaged as an autism-related book was because we all begin in that system of sensing, a world before mind, where we have a preconscious state that is a state of beingness rather than up there in mind and conscious awareness. And we're yet to accumulate that world of meaning, that dictionary, which then changes how we experience the world. We start to experience it with interpretation, with interpreting rather than sensing it. And then after that, we gain all the indoctrination and inheritance of culture and ego, etc., and all the cladding, and then that changes how mind experiences it. And so it's a progressive level of change in how we experience the world. But as a person who grew up meaning deaf and meaning blind until late childhood, when I gained language with meaning, and until my 20s when I got cohesive visual perception, I retained a lot of that early capacity to navigate my world by pattern and theme and feel. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that system is, how we've all come from it, how some people lose it, and why it's a good thing to get it back. So the system of sensing is our first world. And in our first world, we're really in our own world. It's this place where we accumulate huge amounts of experiences, sensory experiences, emotional waves, tones, movement, textures, smells, sounds, colours, patterns. We're both sensing this stuff, we are intuiting this stuff, we are experiencing it by merging with it. We become part of the music. We feel the music inside of us. We become part of that texture until we can't feel the separateness of ourselves and that texture. We're wrapped up in that texture. We experience the colours, but we move through the colours, and the colours feel like they're moving through us. We meet, we encounter people, but we experience them like a kind of living music, like this music of beingness that has a different shape, in a sense, each one. And their shape changes how we experience it. So it's not yet a world of self and other. It's a world of self in other and other in self. And it's not a world of imitating. It's a world of merging in order to know something as the basic sensory and emotional experience of what we're merging with. So we are these experience machines, in a sense, and it's not yet a place where we consciously think about things. We're getting such a soup of sensory and emotional information. There isn't those structures yet with which to interpret and gain conscious awareness. So we're in a very pre-conscious state, and we're taking in far more than we can actually consciously process. And this is building up those maps, the repertoire, the dictionaries, in those connections in the brain that have not yet been made. And as such, because we haven't got all those connections made, there's nothing to filter what's coming in. And so we get overwhelmed, and we contract, and we scream, and we look away, and we, cry, or we space out, or we dissociate, or however we manage that, which I guess you could say is a bit autistic, a bit autistic, and therefore we all have this autistic response to the world. And some people continue to have that, and others make enough connections in their brain that they begin to filter what's coming in, and they thereby cut down on a large amount of what's coming in, and they build their repertoires so that everything that's coming in progressively is coming in with meaning and it's manageable, and then we call those people less autistic. But because we're getting flooded with information and we haven't yet got those structures to filter this stuff, what happens with all that accumulated information is that it sort of sits within us. And if somebody was to, like as we get older and they try to tap into that directly, we might not feel we have that knowledge, that conscious awareness, and therefore we can't respond. But if they do something that maybe isn't what we expect, or they address somebody else, we might find that this unknown knowing suddenly comes through, and it surprises us. It surprises us because we didn't consciously know that we had any of that understanding, that we'd done anything with that knowing. But it's unknown knowing because it came in without the filtering, and it was being processed back there in that pre-conscious state, not in the conscious state, not in mind, what we know of as conscious mind. The pre-conscious state is really more, I guess, body. It's more like body-brain rather than mind. And so then if we can progressively talk about how we move out of this state of mergence, this state of beingness, this state of sensing, this place of unknown knowing, this my world, what is our next stage, if you like. And our next stage is really that we move into being a sensory being in interaction with the external world. We're taking our my world and we're playing with the external world and taking this back and forth into our own world. So what is the external world? Is it, happy birthday, blow out the candles, or aren't you a pretty boy? Oh, look, he's smiling, or whatever. Is it that world of cladding? Because no, the external world as a sensory world is not all that cladding. That's not what it is. And if you bring all that in too early, the person is not yet ready for it. And I'm not sure that we should necessarily be too ready for it, and certainly not too soon. And we're progressively building a society where we pathologize anybody who's not, straight up for all the cladding by the time they're 2 or 3 years old. But that is, in my opinion, a huge ignorance of the process, of the natural process of how human beings mature from their my world into the external world, into the world of mind, and then, if necessary and where necessary, that world of cladding and ego.
But I have spoken with many other autistic people, and I know that many of us share this experience, but sometimes it's scary to speak about, again, because something I find is there are a lot of people that speak about parts of my experience, but often it'll be done in a way that I don't feel aligned with, so I don't connect with that delivery, if that makes sense. I spoke yesterday in our group session about, and I actually received an email this morning from somebody asking for clarification. There are many terminologies used to describe what I understand as autism. Highly sensitive person is one of them. Indigo child is another. Rainbow child. So that's an example of language that other populations of people use that many times describe an autistic experience. But because the information out there about autism written in books, and we call this book autism, is based on a criteria of deficits, it misses the complete picture of the person. And the language used to describe deficits, as my good friend Kieran Rose and autistic colleague said yesterday, those criteria describe a person who is struggling, or somebody who is distressed, or having co-occurring conditions. So we've got these basic criteria outlining how a person would present if they're autistic, but we're missing out on a complete picture of a whole human being.
The other day, my friend and I were discussing the importance of language and how to frame things in a way that they express what you truly mean and want to say. And also how cult-ure can totally influence your understanding of words and give a certain meaning to a word, and that another culture maybe uses that word in a completely different way. So it's cult-ure that has that big impact on channeling our understanding of the words we use. Edward Bernays, he wrote about it in this book, Crystallizing Public Opinion. And if this is combined with obedience to authority, 20, 30 years later, the same word gets a completely different meaning, just because politics suddenly reframe the meaning of that same word.
I recognise social hierarchies. I'm able to identify them very, very quickly. And the clue is in the first word, social. Social hierarchies. They're made up, they're not real, and so my PDA wiring does identify them and does recognise them as power imbalances. Now, I recognise that this is something that, society is riddled with. Hierarchies. But it's not about not recognizing them for me. It's about the fact that in order to respect people, my respect for a person is based on the type of person they are, how they treat themselves, how they treat others. It's never about what they do for a living, how old they are, what medals they carry, what awards they have, whether they have high distinctions in an academic pursuit or degree. None of that matters to me as a PDAer. It always comes down to what kind of person they are. My wiring is focused on the kind of person someone is. So yes, I absolutely recognise social hierarchies. Do I respect them? Yes, I respect other people enough to accept that that is a way that they live, and that is a system that may or may not work for them. It's not a system that works for me. Hierarchy does not work for me because I cannot be in relationship with power imbalances. I can't work for other people, which is why I work for myself. As an employer, we don't have hierarchies. We work together.
Same goes for me. For me, it's really stressful when some boss comes and then, plays the boss card, starting to commanding you around, criticizing, completely infiltrating your space, where before you were content doing your work, and suddenly some fucking person barges in, and because they think they are higher than you, it's just their ego talking. They have not done anything to earn my respect, but rather the opposite, because I don't feel respected when I'm criticized or told what to do and how to do it. Just can't handle that. And for me, that was really too much. I got so stressed, and then my amygdala gets triggered, and then I get into a fight or flight response. I start banging drawers or just run away. And one time I left the train. I had a complete meltdown because it got me so stressed. It was one of the worst moments at work. Now I have become a recluse, and that's why I call myself Blue Hermit. And I prefer to work on my art in solitude, going to the forest all by myself, And if I choose to connect with people, then it's on a one-on-one basis and with people that make me feel relaxed, safe, and I can truly connect with them. And who decides that? It's cult-ure. So that's why I have become quite skeptical and careful to jump on every bandwagon and really rather just stop and orient myself what is going on. Usually I just remain on the fence with things. I have no dog in any fight. And I just observe where this is going. And nature has truly helped me to become more present and just be and not rush around like a headless chicken.
Is that I do respect other people and I'm fascinated and curious about, what works and doesn't work for others. So my way isn't the only way. I just live a certain way because of my neurobiology and I've worked very hard to figure out what works for me. So again, it's not about not recognizing social hierarchies. It's about not feeling aligned with them because I think everybody deserves a fair go. If we take this and take it into a classroom as an example, where a child may not bow down to an educator or do everything that they ask, that's not about not recognizing hierarchy. It's about there being a presence of power imbalance. Even that, though, is okay. It's okay for us as PDAs to know that someone's job, someone's position is to be in a position of leadership, but it's about how they do it. If there is an educator who provides autonomy, who really hears their students, who is flexible and understanding, who is curious about their students, who shares of themselves selflessly and generously, that is what a PDA would respond to really, really positive as a great leader. And that would be a hierarchy that would be really well received by a PDA. Respond to people in a way that is balanced. And what that looks like might be a 5-year-old telling, a 65-year-old that they've been rude to them. I don't like it when you talk like that, Grandma. That's really rude. For past generations, and even now, of course, that has been considered to be insubordinate or disrespectful. However, the PDA brain doesn't quite work like that. See the human, the person, the human.
Yes.
And I think when you are a PDA and you are accustomed to not only being in unsafe connections with people who want to control anyway, isn't about us not recognizing social hierarchies. It is about needing safety in connection where there are not made up power imbalances. That's what we're talking about here. We're really hypervigilant around any change in facial expression, tone of voice, body language. It's like we feel the shift and we no longer feel safe. When I feel connected to somebody and I feel safe with somebody and then unexpectedly they show me a side of themselves I haven't seen and it's directed at me in aggression, I struggle to come back, to return to that connection. I'm dysregulated.
Or it's also not the word itself, but the energy behind it. So there is definitely power behind words. Why language is important.
We want our children to put their socks on at breakfast time. Put your socks on and then you can have breakfast. So breakfast is offered conditionally. This is how we've been taught. This is not indirect. Breakfast is offered conditionally. So there's a compromise of autonomy. There's no choice. It's demand language. Put your socks on and then you can have breakfast. So you can see this happens instantly. This disables the person by activating their threat response with demand language. Their brain then directs their body to avoid at all costs as a matter of survival. So the brain does not care for details. It doesn't care that it's important to eat breakfast. It doesn't care that we love the person who's using this language and telling us to put our socks on. The brain knows that threat response, that amygdala, only cares about us surviving. So you can see also that there's a present threat and a clear hierarchy. There's the hierarchy. If we're going to use an indirect approach, we might say, Brecky's here, Doodlebug, for when those socks find a smelly pair of feet to hide away. So we're using humour and a bit of silliness. We've already presented the breakfast that they want first. So there's none of this. We're saying Brecky's here, so here it is, for when those socks find a smelly pair of feet to hide away, instead of saying put your socks on. So you can see that breakfast is made and on offer unconditionally. There's choice, control, there's an exchange, humour and indirect language. But this is important, this next part. We accept the possibility that those socks may not find a smelly pair of feet to hide away, and we still move forward and allow the child to have their breakfast. This will assist over time in calming that threat response. It removes the hierarchy and it builds trust and safety.
The power of the word, the ancient magic of the verb. For the ancient native peoples of the Americas, words and above all song, the musical or sung word, possessed a magical and healing power, since their worldview gave them an intimate relationship with nature through respect and care for their own environment. We live in a world made of words. Words are not mere forms of communication. They express whole ideas and give meaning to emotions. Words are almost everything in this world. In social, political, and cultural life, the use of words, more than any other factor, determines the way we think and feel, to such an extent that the way stories or events are told has a decisive effect on the way we perceive reality and how we read it. Our individual opinion is shaped by words. Words can be like X-rays. If they are used properly, they pass through everything. Aldous Huxley. Life in its many forms also had its expression through words and song as materialization of a spiritual plane. For this reason, there are words in the native languages that interweave the material plane with the spiritual plane in a poetic way that cannot be translated literally into other languages. Apapachar is the most beautiful word that Nahuatl has given to the Spanish language, because it means to embrace or caress with the soul. The wisdom of Nordic culture deserves a special mention, as the echoes of its magical alphabet and all the beauty of the origin of fairy tales and supernatural beings, the fruit of the oral transmission of its ancient history, reach us today. The alphabet, known as runes, was sacred. The Norse or Viking culture says that it was given by the god Odin, the great creator who can do anything. It was how he communicated with his people. It had a divine character, but fell into disuse when Christianity considered it pagan and persecuted those who used it. This unique primitive Genesic language, the father of all human languages, is the runes, which the first man engraved on stones with holy hands. Krum-Heller, a runic course. Words arise from the union of sounds. naming everything that exists, but there are words which, being inaudible to the human ear, we cannot pronounce. Words and their effect. The effect of spoken words must be measured with nobility, for many times one unconsciously hurts others with words. Words are a mirror of thought. There is a direct relationship between order and clarity of thought on the one hand and manifestations through language on the other. In modern times, we have ever more forms of social media communication, but interpersonal communication has suffered. As human culture has become impoverished, so too has language. In-depth communication is harder. Interactions tend to be superficial, and skill in communicating ideas, feelings, etc. is being lost. What we say, our word, has a constructive or destructive effect depending on what we say and how we say it. Undoubtedly, the effect of words depends on the type of energy they are impregnated with and the intention behind them. In esotericism, this quality of words is called geometry of the word. Words produce objective geometrical figures. Such figures are filled with cosmic matter and crystallize materially. What Christy Forbes pointed out here really resonated, because I'm so frustrated with this type of idea people have, and then immediately you are boxed and objectified, no longer seen as individual but as a disorder.
We acknowledge that autism, as an example, is a disability, 100% a disability, but I don't accept that I have a disorder. The only true experts on neurodivergence are neurodivergent people ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm the expert on every neurodivergent person. I'm not. I'm only the expert on me. It's important that we learn from autistic people themselves, because that's where we can begin to have what we've been taught by non-neuroaffirming professionals dismantled. And that can be really challenging, really, really challenging. I was heavily immersed in the disorder narrative. I felt disempowered, I felt disconnected, I felt inadequate, I felt I couldn't possibly have the same knowledge and expertise as a professional. I had to be in therapy to be able to undo everything I'd been told and taught about autism. And I'm an autistic person. So all the things that we read in the books, all the things that are still on offer to families and professionals, a lot of it is not neuroaffirming. A lot of it is pathologizing, it is dismissive, it is ableist, it is othering. It's disorder narrative, and it's us and them. We are forced to do the work, dismantling, to do the challenging of our own thoughts and beliefs around what autism is. Because without that, our understanding of autism is going to find us in a position with therapists and therapies that we think are suitable, but they may not be. So the first thing we do is we do the work. This doesn't just mean learning about autism. It means about addressing our trauma.
Are your stims increasing dramatically during this moodiness? You have temptations to hit your head. That moodiness is actually you are in severe sensory.
Mapping yourself out with different tools like these quizzes that Carol Bird has on her channel, but also by your own observations and experiences. You can get to know yourself and really know best when you are in sensory overload, because you are with yourself 24/7. And just now I feel how comfortable it is, because the weather has cooled down. And as I said several times, that I still don't like summer heat temperatures. And immediately, as soon as the temperature goes down below 18 degrees Celsius, I feel so at ease. Yeah, and that's just the autistic sensory sensitivity. That's no longer histamine intolerance, but still autistic sensory sensitivity. And when I'm aware of that, I can deal with it.
Addressing that which creates discomfort in us, because there are going to be mountains of disapproval and judgment and rejection and dismissal and ableism and gaslighting, sometimes from our own families and friends. And that's because of their conditioning. So always being prepared to be faced with people having an opinion. So as we learn more and more and more about what autism truly is and what it means for us, there's so many complex layers to this. It is not simple, it is not black and white, and there is no right or wrong answer for everybody. We can't do blanket statements, we can't do generalization. We just can't. This is a person-to-person situation that we have to consider carefully. The person's sense of self, their sense of belonging, and we want to make life as accessible and as joyful as possible. Now, this is why we come back to the initial foundational approach, where we learn and we process our discomfort, come to a place of acceptance. I think we need to give ourselves permission to know that just because our children are autistic or we're autistic, we may not need any therapy. We just may not. We can't talk about being advocates if we're telling people what they should and shouldn't do as a blanket statement. Can you say we may not need any therapy again and play the applause sound effect? Oh, sure, please let me. You know, the thing is, we may not need therapy. Thank you. And that's hard for people to believe, that you can be neurodivergent and not need therapy. But when we understand that this is not a medical disorder, then it makes sense that we may not need therapy.
Exactly.
We may be okay.
Yes.
There are generations and generations of people who really could have benefited from therapies and supports. So even replacing the word therapy with supports,
Yes.
tools, and there are also people that grew up without speech therapy, OT, and they feel neutral about that.
Possibly in ancient times, people who were a bit different, who nowadays are labeled autistic, they might have used other remedies, sacred medicine. Celtic art. Our Irish ancestors may have seen patterns that ended up carved onto rocks at Newgrange, like the swirling Triskelion. Shrooms is a group that advocates for the therapeutic use of magic mushrooms in Ireland. David McNamara, a spokesperson for Shrooms, says, "We have to look at art and folklore to infer mushroom use by the ancestors. The rock art in Knowth and Newgrange appear to depict entopic patterns, which, according to some archaeologists, implies psychedelic medicine use by the artists. Many researchers are fascinated by entopic patterns and motifs found on megaliths across the country. The theory is that entopic phenomena normally occur during states of altered consciousness, patterns that were seen while off with the fairies were then used in artwork, which survive today at places like Newgrange. That makes only sense to me as an artist. When you just feel you relax and then you're in a state of flow. It doesn't necessarily mean you are in an altered state. It's really a very profound state of flow, very relaxed. And then, of course, you open yourself up. And then inspiration comes in and ideas, what you could draw inside this mandala, what you could add, and then one thing comes to the next. And that's how it spontaneously evolves, with the colors along in harmony. And I think all kinds of art is made like that, out of a state of deep relaxation, entering the void perhaps. Like integrating everything you experience and observe around you. You integrate it into your art. Possibly such people were rather highly respected in their tribes back then.